On Kiwi.
The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
Live from the New Scientist Labs, Janine Young, newscientist.com.
Yeah, talking the latest in new science, it is Janine Young. Good morning, Janine.
Good morning to you.
And you're sounding just a little bit better than last week, which is good to hear.
That wouldn't be hard. I was a very sick little chicken last week.
Indeed. Hey, let's talk about our two topics. Our second one is deep. I hope you're ready to get a little bit deep on the show. But first up, this one a little bit fluffier, though it's very cool. Communicating with dolphins. Apparently we might be able to do this soon.
Or not. Dolphins, for a long time in captivity, have been able to communicate with their keepers. So they have been able to work out systems where the dolphins are able to point at particular cards or particular systems, or that they've worked out ways where we're not only able to tell the dolphins what we want them to do, they've also, in a very limited fashion, been able to tell us whether they wanted to play with seaweed, for example, or whether or not they wanted to ride the bow wave of a ship. So very, very simple communication. However, it's always been one way, which means that you have very limited ideas in exactly what the dolphin wants. You know, how they may or may not be happy. You know, there's animal welfare concerns in here as much as anything else. But scientists can't resist a challenge. So what some of them are doing in Florida is heading out into the wild. They're taking a couple of hydrophones and a computer with them, and they're trying to record dolphin language in the wild. So they communicate with each other through clicks and whistles, and I think we all saw Flipper. I think we know how dolphins communicate. We can hear it, we just don't know what it means.
Yeah.
Part of the challenge is that dolphins have sounds that can go up to around 200 hertz, which is around 10 times as high as that which we can hear with our ears. And they can stretch their whistles out, they can change them in a lot of different ways. So being able to pick any of this language without any kind of base to start from is really tricky. So what these researchers are doing is, as I said, going out and recording these sounds. They plan to go out and try and play back to the dolphins what they consider to be little words, if you like, sections that they've put together that they think mean seaweed. It's not rocket science here, is it? But, you know, if you can get it to work, it'd be interesting. They want to see if the dolphins then respond to it, if they mimic it. And they're hoping over time, using a particular computer program that has been able to pick up really interesting patterns, like watching someone doing bicep curls in a lab, never having seen the physical action before, being able to pick up sort of fundamental units of the dolphin's language that look like an interesting pattern. And they're hoping over time to be able to build up the fundamental units of dolphin language.
Wow.
Now, an interesting parallel has been drawn for this, that it would be very much like an alien landing on Earth and randomly spouting lines from The Godfather. It wouldn't be particularly meaningful, and you'd think that, frankly, they were mad. You'd run. You'd avoid them completely. So it's possible the dolphins are going to look at us and just go, yeah, what are you doing?
Yeah.
And not want anything to do with us. But the fundamental idea is there to try and work out how dolphins communicate and whether or not we would be able to interact with them on any kind of level.
It's a starting point, though, really, isn't it? Because then you could make these sounds and then from there see what the reaction is, and that might determine perhaps the meaning in some ways.
And that's exactly it, because unless you try, I guess you'll never really find out. And because dolphins are highly intelligent, because they do have some sense of self, we were talking about self last week, that they actually do recognise themselves in a mirror and the like, that they interact with humans already. So it's an interesting starting point, and it's a real, challenge to be able to do this kind of thing. So, we'll keep you posted, let you know how they go.
Okay. All right, well, moving on onto this next story. Now, this is an interesting philosophical sort of one, I suppose, but trying to figure out what we don't know. Like, they say that, okay, there's chimpanzees have no idea about quantum physics, or no idea that it even exists, but are there things out there that we have no idea or could even conceive of that exist as well?
The short answer is probably yes. The longer answer is that humans are very good at trying to work stuff out regardless. it's very possible that because of, constraints of the physical world or the way our brains work, or just, as you say, things we are completely oblivious to, that there are probably a bunch of things that we'll never know. But humans tend to take what they don't know as a challenge and as a starting point for looking at other things, rather than just going, oh, well, we can't know about that, we'll just leave that alone.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that over time, things like whether or not black holes function and the way they function and whether or not, in fact, they exist have been a really hot area of research. And just because we don't know what goes on inside them, apparently the hypothetical models that they have, there is some evidence to suggest that actually they've got that right. But the one thing that we will absolutely not be able to prove one way or the other, so therefore we can't know, is precisely how the universe managed to start life 3.8 billion years ago on Earth. Again, we've got an idea. They think pretty well, they know how it happened, but you can't ever be sure because it's not something you can test.
Yeah.
If you can put it into a lab, you can't be certain that that's the precise process that happened. And so that's one thing we absolutely will never know for certain, but we've got an idea. In terms of how the universe began, that's another one that people kind of go, oh, we can't possibly know that. Well, they've got an idea. There was a guy called Heisenberg a number of years ago that came up with the idea that you can never really be sure of where things are and how fast they're travelling. It's known as the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Now, the physicists in your audience will be going, oh yes, I know all about that. But for the rest of us, what it just means is that for a given particle, for example, on very, very small scales, you cannot know where it is and how fast it's travelling.
Right.
You influence one, you measure one and it influences the other.
Yeah.
That's all you need to know. Now, this could be a basis for understanding how the universe, everything, came into existence. Because what it implies that you can't ever be certain that the universe, when there was no Big Bang, when nothing had happened, that the energy in that universe was always going to be zero. So it means that we can't be certain that there was never anything going on. I think we're getting pretty deep here. I know it's only 9:15, but bear with me, people. So it means that this could be that the universe just flickered away from zero for a heartbeat. Not that there was a heartbeat at the time, but you take my meaning. And that may be the spark, if you like, that was able to give the universe enough energy to create itself out of seemingly nothing. So there's a lot of physics in this, but there's also a lot of philosophy in this, as you said. Do we have the ability to understand how this happened? And again, there are at times some amount of evidence to suggest that these sorts of ideas are in fact correct.
But you see, for me,
scientists and
well, to say, for me, this raises the question, and this is quite outrageous, but let's say there's a big head hanging in the sky, but because our senses and the way that we operate and the way our mind works, we can't see it. You know what I mean? Like maybe there is, but we just can't perceive it, or something. That there's a big head there in the sky, or something. I mean, that would be an outrageous example, but maybe there's things out there, or even on Earth here, that we just can't even perceive or see. Yes,
there's parts of the insect world, for example, that we can't see. They see in ultraviolet and in different spectra from what we do. So, yes, it's very likely that there's things out there that we can't see. If you look at them through a particular type of camera that generates, everything from gamma rays or whatever, there's a bunch of different ways of being able to look at the world. So some would argue that, oh no, we've already looked. Right. And there's things that we know that we can't see, but if we look at them in the right way, we can. I'm not so, what's the word, arrogant as to believe that we can know everything, that we do know everything, that even at what we don't know we can work around. I believe there's plenty out there that we can't possibly know. I know the limitations of my own brain, and there's lots I don't know, but that's a lack of, exposure to certain things. But I suspect there are probably specific limitations on what we can and can't sense and see and understand. I think
Indeed.
there has to be, because there's only so much the human brain can do.
We'll leave it on that hanging sort of question there, I think, Janine Young. Thanks so much. The stories you'll find in the New Scientist magazine coming out next week, also newscientist.com. We'll see you next week. Thanks, Janine.
See you next week.